Okay, so today we're diving into a case that's really stuck with me, and it's a tough one, frankly.
Yeah, definitely one of those stories that just, it hits you in the gut.
Absolutely. So we're looking at the death of a 10-year-old boy, Dakota Levi Stevens, in
Yeah.
Valparaiso, Indiana. And
Right.
we've got a good bit of source material here, news articles, court documents, really laying out what happened and
Mm.
some background on Dakota too, his time in foster care. And, our goal is to kind of try and understand the facts as they're presented and see, what we can learn from this whole thing.
Yeah, piece together the story as best we can and yeah, see what sense we can make of it.
So to set the scene, it all starts on April 25th when there's a 911 call from a home in Valparaiso, a child not breathing, no pulse.
And that child is Dakota Levi Stevens, 10 years old.
Right, and when the police get there, the reports say there's bruising on his neck and chest.
Yeah, right away, that's a
Yeah.
huge red flag.
Yeah.
It suggests there could be something more than just a medical emergency going on.
For sure. And tragically, Dakota died 2 days later in the hospital. And then his foster mother, Jennifer Lee Wilson, she was 48 at the time. She was charged with reckless homicide.
And that charge of reckless homicide, it's interesting, right? Because it suggests that they didn't think she meant to kill him,
Right.
but that her actions were so reckless they led to his death.
Yeah, there's a disregard for the risk involved, and that's a key part of the legal definition.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to that day. Wilson told the police that Dakota had run away earlier and was found at a neighbor's house.
Okay.
And when he got back home, she says he started misbehaving, throwing himself on the ground outside.
So far, it sounds like, just a kid, being a kid, maybe pushing the boundaries a bit. But then,
And it takes a really dark turn.
yeah, according to the reports, Wilson said she sat on Dakota.
Sat on him?
Yeah, and not just, like, briefly, she said she applied pressure to his head and neck for around 5 minutes.
Oh my God, and what was Dakota doing during all of this?
The reports say he was screaming that whole time.
Screaming. That's just awful to think about.
And to make matters worse, she told police she was actually on the phone with his caseworker while this was happening.
Oh God, you can't even imagine what must have been going through that caseworker's mind hearing that in the background.
I mean, just a horrible situation all around.
And then it gets even more disturbing. She told the police that when Dakota stopped moving and went quiet, she thought he was faking it.
Yeah, that's a really chilling detail because it suggests she wasn't immediately aware of the severity of what she'd done.
Or maybe she was just in denial.
Could be. It wasn't until she noticed his eyelids were pale that she realized something was seriously wrong.
By then it was too late.
Tragically. Yeah, by the time the paramedics arrived, he wasn't breathing and had no pulse.
And it's worth mentioning here that their reports note Dakota's weight. He was 6.5 stone, which is about 91 pounds. And Wilson.
Right, and they say she weighed about 240 stone.
That's a huge difference. A child that small would have no chance of getting out from under that kind of weight.
Exactly, and that weight disparity, it's a crucial factor in understanding how the injuries occurred.
Absolutely. So Dakota was airlifted to the hospital, but as we said, he died 2 days later, and police at the scene described Wilson as visibly distraught.
Yeah, well, I mean, in that situation, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
But the focus obviously has to be on what led up to that point.
Right, and the autopsy report is really where the severity of the injuries becomes clear.
The medical examiner found catastrophic internal injuries, organ damage, soft tissue damage, hemorrhaging in his liver and lungs. It's just horrific.
And they determined the official cause of death was mechanical asphyxia, which means he was essentially suffocated.
Right, the pressure on his chest and neck prevented him from breathing.
And then there's this other element that just adds another layer of horror to this whole story, the Ring doorbell footage.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. It actually captured part of what happened.
Right, the court documents describe this footage. It shows Wilson lying on Dakota's neck and head while he's screaming.
And you can hear those screams gradually fading until they stop. And then she starts calling his name over and over.
And she tells one of her other children to call 911.
And there's this one line that really chills me to the bone. It's caught on the video. She says, "I was laying on him and he was acting bad."
God, that's just so disturbing to hear, knowing what happened.
It really gives you a glimpse into her state of mind at that moment, and it's just incredibly unsettling.
So in January, Jennifer Lee Wilson was sentenced to 6 years in prison with 1 year suspended to be served on probation.
It's a tough sentence, but it reflects the charge of reckless homicide. The court determined that her actions led to Dakota's death.
Yeah, and obviously there's a range of opinions on whether that's enough time, but that's the legal outcome.
Right.
We also know that Wilson had 3 other adopted children living with her, in addition to Dakota, who was in foster care.
And following this incident, her foster parent license was immediately suspended, and it's still under review.
Which makes sense given the circumstances.
Yep.
And the St. Joseph County Coroner's Office officially ruled Dakota's death a homicide.
Right, confirming that his death was a direct result of someone else's actions.
And then there's this Facebook post from Hayden Herzl. He was a former foster parent to Dakota.
I remember reading that post. It was heartbreaking.
He talked about Dakota's excitement and passion, and he said, "The system definitely failed you, my son."
Yeah, that line really gets to you. It speaks to a sense of helplessness and frustration that the system meant to protect Dakota didn't do enough.
Absolutely. And he also mentioned these little details about Dakota liking chicken nuggets, pizza, and sweets.
It's those little things that really remind you that this was a real child with a whole life ahead of him.
It just adds another layer of tragedy to the whole thing.
It does.
So we've covered a lot here: the initial 911 call, the bruising, the police finding Wilson's account, the horrifying autopsy report, that Ring doorbell footage, the sentencing, and then this incredibly moving tribute from Dakota's former foster parent.
It's a lot to take in, and it's hard not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer sadness of it all.
Right, and when you look at all of this together, what's so clear is that this is a tragedy that can't be undone.
A 10-year-old boy lost his life. And regardless of intentions, the actions that led to that are irreversible.
And Herzl's words about the system failing Dakota, they really stick with you.
They do.
It makes you think about the whole foster care system. What are the safeguards in place? Are they enough? Are foster parents getting the support and training they need?
These are questions that deserve serious attention. And this case should make everyone stop and think about the vulnerabilities of children in foster care and what we as a society can do to better protect them.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation we need to be having because ultimately we have a responsibility to ensure that no child suffers the same fate as Dakota.
Right. We owe it to these vulnerable children to create a system that truly protects them and supports their well-being.
So to our listeners, I want to leave you with this. What are your thoughts on this case? What systemic issues or individual factors do you think played a role in this tragedy? And what questions do you have about the safety and oversight of children in foster care? It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's a conversation we need to be having.
It is. And I think it's important to remember Dakota's story and use it as a catalyst for change, for demanding better for all children in vulnerable situations.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this difficult deep dive.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more deep dives coming soon.